Hey everyone, this is Metrics, and today I'm going to be talking about dynamic resonance controllers, specifically Soothe, Ozone Spectral Shaper, and RESO by Mastering the Mix. And I'm going to explain why I think of all these three, RESO is by far the best. Soothe used to be the best, but not anymore, and I'm going to explain why. So, some context for this. I've been doing a series called Mixing Law with Clip to Zero, tons of episodes if you haven't seen it yet. This video isn't directly related to those, but it's kind of a follow-on to episode 23, where I talked about considerations for mastering. And one of the segments in there was doing something I call the harshness check. And I showed myself using RESO, and I talked briefly about how I preferred RESO over Soothe. And I got a lot of comments about that. A lot of people are like, why not Soothe? What do you think about Soothe? But isn't Soothe, so I need to talk about this because I really don't like Soothe. I never did really like Soothe, but it was the best thing in town. So let's just dive deep and get right into it. The song that I've been using for part of this series has a vocal section in it. The vocals are processed pretty hot, pretty upfront, so they'll sit in this very loud mix. And here's kind of an intro section where it's just the vocals and one other instrument. And I've got a little rack here that's going to let us hear the vocals dry through Spectral Shaper, through Soothe, or through RESO. And let's just hear what the dry vocals sound like by themselves. Now, this first verse is featuring the vocals alone, and you'll hear that because of all the heavy hotness processing I've done on the vocals to make them sit where they need to sit, because of that, they're a little harsh. I'm using some pretty extreme vocal processing, and we got to get rid of this harshness. But first, let me let you hear the dry, undeharshed signal. And you'll see what the problem is.
I could ask a million questions that would leave me wanting more.
Right? So we don't just have sibilance going on. Sibilance isn't really all that bad. Some people, I think, overdo getting rid of sibilance. It's a natural part of speech. It's a natural part of singing. But there's way worse resonances lurking in this vocal. Anything that's whistly and shrill and kind of unpleasant, like a ringy, those kind of rings that you hear on top of the vocal really get to you. Listen one more time.
I could ask a million questions that would leave.
Hear that whistle ringy all over the spectrum? So that kind of thing will especially drive you crazy on a big sound system in a club. And it's something you really have to try to get rid of. And it's why I had a section in that video called the harshness check, because it really is a very conscious check you should do and get rid of it. So in the very, very old days, we would do something like put on an EQ. And you would make a bell filter, and you'd make it super narrow, and you would sweep back and forth listening for whistly resonances, and when you found one, you would just gain it down in the other direction, right? The problem with this approach is that it's static, and once you've cut this notch into your signal, it's there forever, and you can just like Swiss cheese your signal and just kill it, take all the life out of it, right? So this is not a very good approach. It never was. It was something we lived with because it was the only real approach. Then once upon a time, I think around 2018, Isotope came out with this new module called Spectral Shaper in their Ozone package. And Spectral Shaper was meant to be this kind of dynamic resonance controller where you could set it to listen to a certain band where resonance was usually a problem, usually sibilance, but other types of whistly resonances. And then you had this sort of light, medium, heavy, and you could set a threshold kind of like a compressor, and you could kind of set how aggressively it attacked and released, and maybe balance its tone a little bit for what it was listening to. But it was really exciting at the time. I loved it because it did something, for you automatically. But it wasn't that good. It was still kind of a blunt hammer. Let's listen to the dry signal versus processing it with ozone spectral shaper.
I could ask a million questions.
Okay, that's dry. Here's ozone.
I could ask a million questions.
All right, let's go back and forth a little.
I could ask a million questions. I could ask a million questions.
Right, not much difference. Okay, let's get a little more aggressive with it. Let's bring the threshold down.
I could ask a million questions.
Okay, that's a little better.
I could ask. I could ask.
Right? But it's also kind of taking some life out of the signal, and I could go heavier.
I could ask a million questions.
Let's hear what it's actually doing. Let's hear the signals, this part of the spectrum that it's affecting. You click this listen button. So you can hear it's cutting into the fundamentals of the voice. And you don't really want it taking away from the fundamentals that aren't bad sounding. You're hearing, when you hear the actual voice leaking in, that's a problem, right? So this was good, but you had to fiddle with it. You had to set your threshold, the weight of it correctly. You had to set the threshold correctly. And you could play with these settings, but it was kind of like using a sledgehammer instead of a scalpel. Maybe a better analogy is it's kind of like using a garden rake, right, with a bunch of different tines out in the front of it to plant two seeds. Let's say your resonances are like seeds and you need to push them a little further down into the ground under the soil, right? If you put two seeds on the ground and you want to push them in, what are you going to do? You're going to use your fingers and you're going to very carefully poke one seed down and then you're going to poke another seed down, right? But now let's say those same two seeds are sitting on the ground and you decide to reach over there with a garden rake and just line up a couple of the tines and then push those seeds down. Well, you're going to poke a whole bunch of other holes down into the soil too that don't need to be poked down. Blunt instrument. Sledgehammer versus scalpel, garden rake versus a couple fingers, right? That's the problem with a tool like spectral shaper. So we're going to get rid of spectral shaper because it's no longer relevant. Soothe came out a little bit after spectral shaper, and Soothe has gotten much better over the years. But Soothe is still kind of that rake. You've got all these dials to control how far it pokes down and to kind of control how fat or skinny the tines of the rake are. And you can kind of sort of control how the tines move a little bit to find the seeds. But it's still a rake and it still pokes a whole bunch of holes in your spectrum that you might not need. Let's listen to Soothe now.
I could ask a million questions.
See all these things getting pushed down? That's the rake. It's a blunt instrument. And yeah, I can control the depth with this knob. And yeah, I could make this sharper.
I could ask a million.
And now the little rake tines are skinnier and there's more of them, but they're poking all these holes in my spectrum I don't necessarily want. That isn't necessarily where all the resonances are sitting, right?
I could ask a million questions.
How do I know that all of these things that are getting pushed down actually need to be pushed down? Because chances are good they don't. But Soothe is making this decision for you. And they say, yeah, we'll give you a whole bunch of knobs to kind of control, how many of those little poke down things there are, how wide they are. We'll give you those controls and you can find something that sounds good enough, right? But my experience with Soothe is you start playing with the depth and you start playing with the sharpness and you start playing with the selectivity and you start, okay, I want to make this one push down further or less. I want to make this range push down further or less, and so on and so forth. And it's just, you lose all objectivity. And they only give you 2 comparison modes. And the details, the changes are so, it's like trying to tie intricate knots in a string wearing big, heavy winter mitts on your hands, right? It's just not surgical enough. And resonance control to me is a very surgical thing. You don't want to cut out any more than you have to, or you're going to poke too many holes in your sound and you're going to kill your original sound. Okay, so now let's talk about RESO and why I love RESO. This is the best resonance controller because it gives you all the surgical control you want. It gives all the control to you. And you can be confident you're not poking any holes that don't need to be poked. So first, let you hear the difference between Soothe versus RESO, and you can see for yourself the differences. Okay, here's that dry signal again.
I could ask a million questions.
Here's Soothe.
I could ask a million questions.
And here's RESO.
I could ask a million questions.
Let me let you hear Soothe versus RESO. I'm just going to go back and forth a little bit.
I could ask a million questions that would leave. I could ask a million questions that would leave.
Hear how much smoother this is? I was able to get this as smooth as this vocal's going to get without taking all the life out of it, right? Let's hear it in context of, when it comes in with more instruments. Here's the dry version again.
I do my best to learn to listen.
Now see, because we have a lot of other sounds going on, it's masking to some extent some of the harsh resonances in the original vocal.
I do my best to learn to listen.
But they're still there if you know what to listen for, if you're a producer and you have good ears, right? Now here's what Soothe does.
I do my best to learn to listen. Since you have so much to say.
Right? And that's not bad. That's definitely an improvement. This is why people like Soothe. Now hear it with RESO.
I do my best to learn to listen. Since you have so much to say. If I connect with your position.
Right? Listen to that phrase.
If I connect with your position.
Now Soothe.
If I connect with your position.
Hear how that metallic resonant, there's almost a comb filter. There's so many resonances hiding, especially in this part of the spectrum. And you just can't, it's too blunt instrument. I mean, I could dig deeper by pushing this one even higher. I could try pushing this one up to try and push some of these rake tines further down. But it's just blunt instrument. I've got winter gloves on my hands and I'm trying to poke tiny little seeds in the ground very surgically. All right, I'm going to drop a brand new instance of RESO on here. We're going to go to this new instance. Let's rename this so we keep this straight. Okay, so we're doing RESO from scratch on these vocals. And I'll do it like I did in the original project. I started with this first phrase here.
I could ask a million questions.
So right off the bat, you can see that the frequency spectrum is fairly fine detailed, and you can see that it holds this picture of where some of the highest resonant peaks are hiding, right? And we know that the 2K range through 4K range is especially problematic. You usually don't need to depress anything below 500, usually. And then around 5K, 6K, 7K, yeah, you might get a little sibilance, but it's usually only needs a little bit of control. Now, the way RESO works is you basically click this button that says calculate targets, and then you play something.
And I could ask a million questions.
And boom, RESO has some targets. Now, you'll notice it doesn't have these ones down here. Let's go back to this one and just kind of show you in general, right? So why did it come up with a different set of targets than the first, than over here? Why aren't these targets in the thing? Well, it's probably because I picked a different section. So let's try one more time. I'm going to clear these targets, delete all nodes, right? We'll pick a different section, like this one.
Leave me wanting more.
Because this one has a little bit of stridency in that phrase. So let's calculate targets here.
Leave me wanting more.
Okay, see, it found a couple more targets down here, right? So it's very much dependent on the section you choose to train the algorithm on. Let's try a different section. Let's just clear these out again.
That's why I let you do the talking.
Okay, and this is looking a lot more like what I got here. Okay, so the point is you're going to get a set of targets, and you're going to end up deleting some of these, moving some of these, changing some of these, and adding to some of these. It just kind of depends, and you can play around with it until you find something you like. Let's try one more time from this phrase.
Questions that would leave me wanting more.
Okay, so that looks a lot more like what I had before, right? So here's what we're going to do. We're just going to pretend we're doing this from scratch again. So it's very gentle with its first set of targets. This looks like they're very far down the curve, but this is really only about a 10 decibel reduction. You can set this up here how aggressive you want it to be. 10 is kind of the middle. So what it's doing is it's deciding for itself where the resonances are hiding. And then for every one of the nodes where it found a resonance that it thinks is problematic, it drops it by 10 decibels. It's got a dynamic filter that'll punch down as far as 10 decibels. So watch it filter now. If we do engage targets, they turn green.
Questions that would leave me wanting more.
And you can see up here, it's not really pushing down very hard at all. This is the scale to which it's pushing down.
Questions that would leave me wanting more.
So you can see some of those little red blobs are punching down close to this -10 line, right? Okay, so the first thing about RESO is it's pretty gentle at first. And now you can do things like highlight a section of nodes, and I'm going to do a trick here. I'm going to copy this to the B section. We're going to do this on the B section, right? You can highlight a set of nodes and you can just drag them all up and down as a group. And even if I take my mouse sideways, when you've got them multi-selected and they've all got this double-headed up-down arrow, you can't accidentally drag them sideways off of the actual frequency they first got set on. So that's really cool. So you can like listen and adjust and play with the nodes and do whatever you want, right? Let's go back to A, where they originally were. Another thing you can do is, and I'm going to copy them by clicking this arrow at the top again. I'm going to copy them over to B one more time. Go to the B section because I always want to keep that baseline on A. You can take one individual node and watch what happens if I hold down my control key. It turns to that double-headed arrow. And even if my mouse is way over here and I start moving this way, right, it just goes up and down. It never comes off the frequency that it was on, right? I can also hold down the shift key and you get these horizontal arrows, which means now I can kind of sweep back and forth a little bit, but it won't go up or down. And I can just sort of like maybe fine tune a sweet spot for that cut, that notch, right? So it's pretty smart in giving you control over, placing each node very precisely. Here's another trick that's kind of useful. Let's say I add a new node for whatever reason here. Notice that if I drag it in this direction and it gets close to another node, see how my white line's getting close to that node? It won't let me set it on top of the other node. It'll snap to the other side of that node, and it'll only let me put a new cut where there's room for it. It won't let you, like, see, I can't bump into this one here. If I try to flip over, see, it won't even let me, put it anywhere on top of these two existing nodes. It snaps to the next available kind of place that makes sense in terms of what this tool is doing. So you can sweep around in a blank spot, but once you get near other nodes, it snaps to the other side of them. And that's really, really super useful too, because it means you don't end up with more nodes than you need to, and the nodes summing with each other and giving you unpredictable results. Okay, so some really smart features of this tool. Let's go back to where we started on our baseline. And now this is the coolest part of RESO. Let me pick, there's kind of a problematic phrase right around here.
Million questions that would leave me on,
Okay, that's a really resonant section.
that would leave me on.
There's some really nasty rings in there, right? Now it's already better, just even with what they've detected, right? Here's the dry signal.
That would leave me wanting.
And here's, the automatically detected nodes.
That would leave me.
It's already better, but I'm still hearing some ringiness in certain places. And so here's where you have to listen for the pitch. Listen for the tone or the pitch of the ringing. Let's see if I can find one to zero in on.
That would leave me.
Okay, me, over the me, there's this shh, right around there.
That would leave me.
Okay, it's right around the 4 or 5K range, somewhere in here. So let's listen for it. Now, this is cool. If you turn this on, suddenly, no matter where your cursor is, it becomes like a super thin resonant peak detector. And even cooler, when you put it up in this half of the spectrum, it's kind of like a dry wet mix. This is the dry signal up here. This is the wet resonant suppression part of the signal down here. So check this out.
That would leave me wanting.
Now I'm going to move it down and keep it in the same general area.
That would. Maybe that's what talking's for.
See how it's kind of dry wet, and you can hear the whistles superimposed over the dry signal underneath if your cursor's up in this area. But if I go down here, it removes all of the dry signal, and I'm only hearing the resonant whistles. So you can choose what you want to listen for, and you can find that pitch that you're hearing when the kind of detector circuit is off. So let's listen for that ring one more time on the me.
That would leave me.
E. Okay, it's right around here. It's a ring about like that. Listen for this over ring on top of the me. It's roughly in this frequency.
That would leave me want. That would leave me. That would.
And you can also temporarily toggle this on and off with the Alt key. If I hold down Alt, is it Alt? No, Control, the Control key on Windows anyway. See, so I'm temporarily toggling it on and off. I find it easier, though, to just kind of usually leave this on or off manually by clicking it.
That would leave me.
So what I'm hearing is that whistle that I want to get rid of is already uh, covered by one of the existing nodes. So probably I just need to pull these down a little further to suppress that one whistle more, right? So what I'm going to do is, again, copy over to my B side, click B, and do this operation on the B so that if I overdo it, I can get back to my baseline on A. So what I'm going to do is multi-select these two nodes because it was right around these two nodes. And I'm just going to take them both down while I'm listening to it.
That would leave me. That would leave me. That would leave me.
Okay. So listen to the difference on that me, right? Listen to the ring on top of that. Here's with the nodes up here. Here's with the nodes pulled way down.
That would leave me. That would leave me.
Right? See how that me is much smoother? And see how I was able to use this and its kind of detector and sweeping around and just kind of going back and forth between, you know, the regular signal and the detector signal. You can't do this in Soothe, okay? Let's go back to Soothe because I really need to show you this. This is the main thing I disliked about Soothe. So Soothe has a solo function, but it's based on these bands that you pick here that kind of control a whole swath of resonant tines being dug into the signal. So you can come over here and you can right click on it and say, listen, there's a momentary toggle somewhere. I can't remember it anymore. You can also come down here and click this listen, right? So here's what you hear in, let's see, this is in the 4K range, right? Where these two whistles are, 46 and 43, 42. So yeah, it's this red area, the 4K range, right? You can solo everything in this band and you can drop the Q a little narrower, but it's so clunky. So check it out. I mean, you can't hear anything. I could drag this up. Okay, it's not very useful. It's not very useful, right? I'm not able to really solo and hear the things I'm trying to take out. And even if I could, even if I drop the Q down, it's not nearly as useful as this was, right? Listen to the difference. Right? You can just hear the whistles, the resonances so much more cleanly, so much more surgically. And then let's say I heard something I didn't like right around here, there was a resonance. Okay, now that's not necessarily a bad resonance. It is where some resonant buildup is, but it's not necessarily harsh to our ears. It could just be this is, you know, I'm kind of in this 1 to 2K range, 500 to 2K is where a lot of the fundamentals of the melody and the main timbre of the voice sit. And yeah, there's going to be resonances there because that's how timbre works. It's all the resonances on top of the fundamental, you know, root tone of any note that makes that timbre or that feeling of the human voice. So you don't want to just go for any whistle and yank it down because it's a whistle. It has to be a whistle that's annoying, that's harsh, that's shrill, that feels wrong, that feels like this constant over something that's supposed to be going do 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 do, you know, jumping around in melody. If you hear this constant kind of ring that holds itself over a lot of those notes, that's the kind of resonance you're trying to get rid of. You're not trying to get rid of everything, but let's just put a node here and see what happens. So you could say that's annoying, and you could double click and set a new node there manually. Again, you can't do that in Soothe. You can only adjust these wide bands and say, create a whole bunch of little rake tines, a whole bunch of little holes in this general area, and push them down a little bit or push them down a lot, right? Here you can say, no, I hear one specific ring at one specific frequency, and I want to put a node there and see what happens if I play with that node. So now let's turn this off and let's play with this. And there's a variety of ways to play with it. I could solo it and listen to just this one area. Right? It's not even, there's like one syllable in this phrase that even triggers this node. You can barely hear it now, right? Now I can hold my control key and kind of go up and down and see what happens. Right, so let's say we wanted to get rid of that particular leave me. There's a little bit of a resonance here too on that me, but it's not necessarily a bad resonance. Let's find out. And you'll notice when it's soloed, the more I drag it down, the more I hear it taking effect. Now, if I drag it really far down, you're going to actually hear the word me. And that's why I say it might not be a resonance that's bad, because it's actually part of the audibility of the phoneme e, e, e. It's what's letting you hear the word me clearly in the song. So this is probably not a resonance we want to take down, but let's see what happens. So we can turn off the solo, for example. Now we're hearing this whole signal affected this way. Hear how the me feels a little cloudy now, because we're cutting into that phoneme, I think it's called a phoneme, where the E sound happens, and we're clouding the E. We're making it hard to hear. Right? It's almost like the E disappears a little bit. So this isn't necessarily something we want to get rid of, but you could test it. You could sit here and A-B it by turning this node on and off with this button. Okay, that's with it on. Now it's off. Hear how the E is much more audible now? It's much more distinguishable. Okay, so again, surgical tool. You can find any resonance you want, drag it up and down very surgically, test it very surgically, solo it, turn it on and off, compare it with everything else without having to change anything else. And then if you decide you don't need this one, just get rid of it. Click that X and it's gone, right? So you can come in here and use this tool to find whistles that you're still hearing, that the detection algorithm didn't catch for itself. You can take ones that it found and drag them up and down to fine tune how much they're working, right? Like we did for these two here. And you can add additional ones, like you can check very carefully in a whole problem area in between the nodes it found. And then you can adjust those up and down. And so we could just do this whole iterative process where you just, listen. Okay, see, I still hear on the tail end of me, there's still a whistle right at the end of it. Listen. Leave, on the end of leave. Hear that sharp sh at the end of leave, right? Let's find that. I'm guessing it's a little lower, so we're going to turn this on. Not there. There, it's right around here. Yeah, see this one peak right around here jumping on the end of leave? Right there, it's this one right here. So, we're going to come up here and just place a node right there. Now we're going to start drilling down. My trick is to first take it way down. See, I don't hear that harsh shrill anymore at the end of leave. If I turn this off, hear that sh right at the end of leave. But if I turn it on, We don't hear that harshness as much. And now I could fine tune how much I want it to dig into this frequency.
That would leave me wanting more. That would leave me.
Is that enough? Maybe up here.
That would leave me.
Maybe that's enough. Let's turn it off.
That would leave me. That would leave.
See, that just even this much is kind of taming that. And here's the thing. With all these resonance tools, your brain gets in this mode where you think, I have to eliminate every possible slightly annoying whistle. I have to remove every last shred of harshness that I hear, right? It's very easy to get into this mindset where you're going to overdo it, okay? And that's the other thing that's really cool about RESO is you can make these settings and then let your brain relax a little bit, walk away from it all for a minute, 5 minutes, the next day, whatever it takes for your brain to cool down. And you can come back and double check these things, right? And you might say, you know, I wonder if I went a little too hard in this area. Maybe let's see what it sounds like if I just take a whole set of them and move them, bump them up like 4 or 5 dB, or bump them down a little bit, bump them up a little bit, right? And you can keep sort of testing and fine tuning and saying, maybe I'm taking too much out of this sound. Maybe these two don't need to be quite that far down. Maybe I need to just, maybe that's good enough. And you can reset your brain, reset your ears, objectively test, but you have this fine surgical control. And you can eventually, over time, with some careful listening, fine tune the points that the RESO itself found, add your own points where you're hearing whistles that RESO didn't seem to think were a big problem, but you can hear that it's a big problem. And you can adjust them and just get everything exactly where you need it to be. And that's how you end up with something more like this setting, which is what I finally came up with for this vocal. And this sounds pretty good throughout, you know, most of the vocal section, both the dry sections up front.
And I could ask a million questions. That would leave.
And sections where there was more instrumentation going on.
I do my best to learn to listen. Since you have so much to say. If I connect with your position, I will learn so much that way.
And, you know, these melodic, white, noisy, ARPy, RESO sweep type sounds, I was using the same tool on those too. On my ARP line, I've got RESO here, and here was a very set of gentle corrections I needed to make this white, noisy sweep much less harsh. You can see these are the points RESO added, and then I added a couple more where I was still hearing a little extra whistle on top that I didn't like. So I added about 5 points of my own, got them set up exactly where I wanted, and now this thing sounds good, and the white noise part of the sound, it doesn't harsh your ears out. Okay, it's a great tool. It's the best resonance controller out there. And so, you know, I think in summary, it works kind of like the old EQ way of doing things when we were just using EQ, in that you can really, really carefully audition and listen for where the whistle is happening, and then you can create a point and drag it down. But unlike the old EQ way of doing things, number one, these filters are really well built. I mean, Tom Frampton did a great job with the filters on these. They're perfect for this kind of use case. They're not too steep, they're not too blunt. And then the other thing that is perfect is it's dynamic. These are all dynamic EQ points, so they only act when they need to. They only act when the signal's pushing hard into that frequency. And that's why you're seeing the dynamic behavior up here. They only act as much as they need to, when they need to, and you have full control over each and every frequency. And it's just the workflow in this is just great once you get used to it. So it's a little more work than Soothe. Maybe if you're a new producer, Soothe is still a good tool for you because you don't feel confident at listening for these resonances and knowing which ones to get rid of and how much to get rid of them, right? But once you get a little more attuned to listening for harshness and fixing harshness, this is the tool. There's just nothing better out there. I stand behind that 100%. And Tom, just amazing work on this plugin. It's amazing. Everything I always disliked about Soothe or Spectral Shaper, you addressed, and it's just awesome. And I have to remind everyone, I paid for this plugin. This is not paid promotion. I just genuinely love this tool. I don't have any kind of association with Mastering the Mix or Tom Frampton. Some of his tools are great. It's that simple. Okay, hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.